If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. The White Plague comes to Jefferson County. Around 1900, tuberculosis was killing more Americans than any other disease. In Louisville, it moved quietly through the tenements where immigrant families lived packed together, sharing air, sharing illness, sharing death. Factory workers breathed it in. Children caught it from parents. By the time most people showed symptoms badly enough to see a doctor, the disease had already taken hold. Jefferson County health officials knew they needed a separate place, somewhere removed from the city, on high ground where fresh air could reach the sick. In 1908, they converted a small schoolhouse on a hill outside Louisville. It was modest, makeshift, but it was a start. It did not hold. Within 2 years, the sick were arriving faster than anyone could manage. The schoolhouse was never built for this. It was simply the only thing available at the time. So the county planned something bigger. Construction on a new, permanent facility began in 1924. When it opened in 1926, Waverly Hills was a fully designed sanatorium, built for the living, but quietly, carefully, also designed with the dead in mind. The architecture of dying. The 1926 Waverly Hills Sanatorium was built to look like hope. 5 stories of reinforced concrete stretched nearly 500 feet along a Kentucky hillcrest. Every floor had long open-air porches where patients lay in beds, exposed to sunlight and fresh air for hours every day. This was the treatment. Doctors believed clean air could slow the disease. So the building was designed around it. The facility ran entirely on its own. It had a power plant, a water system, a kitchen, a laundry, a post office, and a working farm. Patients were not expected to leave quickly. Some stayed for years. Some never left at all. The medical procedures used there were not unusual for the time. Doctors collapsed lungs with needles, removed ribs, paralyzed nerves, and inserted balloons into chest cavities. None of this was done out of malice. Physicians believed these methods worked. The evidence was thin. The suffering was real. But the most telling feature of the building was underground. A 500-foot tunnel ran beneath the hillside, built specifically to carry dead bodies out of the facility without patients seeing them. It was part of the original design. Staff called it the body chute. The intention was to shield the living from the sight of death. Whether it did that, or simply made death feel closer and more certain, is harder to answer. The number that would not stay still. The number 63,000 gets repeated so often that most people assume someone at some point counted. They did not. Jefferson County health records, reviewed by researchers connected to the University of Louisville, put the actual death toll during Waverly Hills tuberculosis years somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000. That is still an enormous number, but it is nowhere near 63,000. The larger figure does not appear in any official document from the sanatorium's operating years. It is not in county records. It is not in newspaper coverage from the time. Researchers tracing it back find it emerging somewhere in the late 1990s to early 2000s, roughly when Waverly Hills shifted from a place urban explorers visited quietly to a destination that ghost hunting television shows treated as sacred ground. That timing matters. A number that large does a specific job. It makes the haunting feel obvious. It tells you before a single piece of evidence is presented that of course something is wrong here. It removes the need to look closely at individual claims because the sheer scale seems to speak for itself. What gets lost in that trade is the real story. Between 6,000 and 8,000 people died at Waverly Hills. They were real patients. Their deaths were recorded, sometimes investigated, and shaped by decisions made by real administrators and doctors. That history is harder to sit with than a myth, precisely because it doesn't let anyone off the hook. The cure arrives, and the hospital starts to die. In 1943, 2 scientists at Rutgers University, Selman Waksman and Albert Schatz, isolated a compound called streptomycin. It was the first antibiotic that could actually kill the bacteria causing tuberculosis. Within a decade, combined with other new drugs, it turned a disease that had filled Waverly Hills to capacity into something doctors could treat with pills. Patients stopped coming. Beds sat empty. A building designed to hold hundreds had almost no one left inside. The county did not close Waverly Hills. Instead, in 1961, it reopened the building as Woodhaven Medical Services, a facility for elderly and psychiatric patients. This decision is where the story gets quieter and harder to follow. Popular accounts of Waverly Hills focus almost entirely on the tuberculosis years. Woodhaven receives far less attention, despite what state records suggest. Inspection reports from the late 1970s flagged problems with patient care and physical conditions inside Woodhaven. Allegations surfaced that electroconvulsive therapy was being applied as a tool for managing behavior, not as legitimate medical treatment. These were not isolated claims. Similar patterns were documented at comparable institutions across the country during the same period. Kentucky ordered Woodhaven shut in 1981. The last patients left in 1982. The building then stood empty for nearly 20 years. Whatever happened inside during the Woodhaven years remains only partially documented. That gap itself raises a question worth sitting with. What the walls remember. When Tina and Charlie Mattingly bought Waverly Hills in 2001, the building was falling apart. Floors had collapsed, walls were crumbling, but the reputation was already there, built quietly through years of urban explorers slipping through broken windows and coming out with stories. Television changed everything. By the mid-2000s, shows on Travel Channel and Sci-Fi had turned Waverly Hills into a household name for paranormal enthusiasts. Investigators arrived with cameras, voice recorders, and electromagnetic sensors. What they reported fell into familiar patterns: footsteps in empty halls, shadows moving where nothing stood, batteries draining in minutes, and occasionally figures in old-fashioned clothing standing at the end of a corridor. Certain names kept appearing across separate accounts. The nurse of room 502, where a real hanging death was recorded in 1928. A child called Timmy. An old woman dragging chains. Some of these reports came from people who claimed no prior knowledge of the building's history, which makes them harder to set aside. The electronic recordings, however, have never held up under controlled scientific testing. Then there are the former staff members. They did not use the word haunted. They used the word heavy. That distinction matters. It sits in a space that neither a camera nor a skeptic fully covers. What does decades of concentrated suffering do to a place, and to the people who walk through it? The question that never closes, Waverly Hills Sanatorium, is still standing. That alone is worth pausing on. Buildings like this one, abandoned for years, stripped by weather and vandals, left without heat or maintenance, usually come down. They rot, or they get bulldozed, or a fire settles the argument. Waverly Hills did none of those things. The Mattingly family bought it and began restoring it. The hotel plan they announced never materialized. What did materialize was a paranormal tourism business, overnight ghost hunts, investigation events, sold-out weekends. The building found a way to pay for itself, just not the way anyone originally said it would. But the building now carries 3 different identities at once. It is a historical site. It is an architectural record of how America treated tuberculosis patients. And it is a commercial product built around ghost stories. These 3 things pull in different directions. The ghost story version keeps winning. The real death count gets replaced by a larger, scarier number. The documented abuse at Woodhaven gets less attention because it is harder to film. The nurse from room 502 left no written record, no explanation. She is simply gone. The building remains. That gap between what survived and what did not is the part of this story that no tour ticket and no investigation has ever actually closed.